Hey guys, so we will be reading this book that I made. It's about women's suffrage, and so there's a little women's symbol right there. Alright, let's get started. Did you know that the women's rights movement actually started before the Civil War? Women played a large role in various reforms during the 1820s and 30s. Reforms such as abolition, religion, morality, and even anti-slavery, just to name a few. Women began realizing through this that they were a crucial part of society and thought to be treated as much. So they began fighting against the submissive gender roles that women had been assigned at the time. These are just two women from the early 1800s. I included that so you can see kind of the way that they're dressed and how they were forced to dress, basically, to kind of cover everything. Did you know that the Seneca Falls Convention was named after where it was held? The Seneca Falls Convention was a pivotal event in the women's rights movement. It was held in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848. Activists Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott led the convention and invited many female and even male abolitionist activists. Their declaration of sentiment for the convention was, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." The women's rights movement began to grow, and it was massive. But once the Civil War started, it began to slow down a lot. So this is a drawing of Elizabeth Cady Stanton at the Seneca Falls Convention, and she's giving her presentation. Did you know that Amendments 14 and 15 jump-started the women's rights movement again? When the 14th and 15th Amendments were ratified, they gave protection to and rights to all citizens, no matter what the race or social standing. And that raised the question as to where women stood in those lines, because at the time, citizens were men. And so that's when women started questioning, like, hey, I want to be included in that. And so it kickstarted the next movement, which was led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. And they took the opportunity for countrywide equality by protesting the 15th Amendment. And this formed an anti-15th Amendment group and they named themselves the National Women's Suffrage Association, or NWSA. And then there was another group that was started around the same time, which was the pro-15th Amendment group, and that was the American Women's Suffrage Association, so AWSA. And while these two groups took different stances on the 15th Amendment, both of them argued that women deserved the right to vote because men and women were created equal, so they should have equal rights. So this is a picture of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and this is Susan B. Anthony, and they're just working together. Did you know that Elizabeth Cady Stanton was the first president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association? In 1890, the NWSA and the AWSA combined into one organization, and they called it the National American Women's Suffrage Association, NAWSA, or NASA. The next group of activists argued that women deserved the right to vote because men and women were different, and therefore brought a different point of view to they just offered a different point of view compared to men. A large portion of the women also supported the abolition movement, and so that helped get more politicians on their side because they were so passionate about abolishing alcohol. And that helped politicians to vote to give them the right to vote. So this is one of the organizations that we were talking about earlier. I believe this one was the anti-15th Amendment group, and so it says the National Women's Suffrage Association. It's just two women that are protesting. Did you know that only some states allowed women to vote before others? Some states began giving women the right to vote starting in the early 1900s, but not all of them did. In an attempt to convince more states to allow women to vote, NASA President Carrie Chapman Cutt developed what she called the winning plan. And that plan is basically to have all state and local suffragettes to go out and protest, but to do it peacefully. And so here are two women who are protesting. It says Votes for Women. Yeah, they're just standing there protesting to get women the right to vote. Did you know, despite popular beliefs at that time that women were the weaker and calmer sex, they also fought violently for their rights? The National Women's Party, which was a separate party from NASA, they had a more physical and violent approach than NASA. They picketed outside the White House and went on hunger strikes so they could draw attention to their cause. And just like how the Civil War slowed down the women's rights movement, the World War I also did the same thing. However, unlike the Civil War, the women's rights movement was not completely stopped altogether. And women used their new position in the working economy during the war to be seen as patriotic and part of a functional society, and that they deserved citizenship, and that would eventually help them to secure the right to vote. So here we see a woman from the National Women's Party protesting outside of the White House, and it says, "Mr. President, what will you do for our women's suffrage?" So you get to see like kind of what they were protesting and how they were protesting. Did you know that over 8 million women went to the poll after they gained the right to vote? So finally, on August 26, 1920, the 19th Amendment was ratified, and that amendment gave women the right to vote. So the following election, which was on November 2nd, 1920, millions of women were at the polls and voting for the very first time in American history, like in all of the states. So here is just a picture of women. You can see a bunch of different women all lined up, ready to vote. Yeah. And then on the back we've got our TEEKs, and this is for social studies in 8th grade, and it is under the culture. It's under culture TEEKs, and it's the student understands the major reform movements of the 19th century, and the student is expected to. And under the subsection B of that culture section, it's evaluate the impact of reform movements, including the women's rights movement. So you can see that there, and you know there's other movements in there, like the 14th and 15th Amendment that we talked a little bit about, included in there. And I also have my source written right here, and that is, I got most of this information from history.com. I found that website is really great at giving you correct information, and that's a summary. So that's what I based this little book off of. Thank you.